Welcome everyone to Africa I View, a podcast that dives deep into the stories shaping the African continent. In today's episode, which will be hosted by our Wakanda warriors straight from Notebook Lim, they will be exploring the escalating tensions between SADC and Rwanda, especially when it comes to the M23 being within Congo borders. A conflict that has been far-reaching implications for the region and beyond, from diplomatic clashes to military posturing. This episode unpacks the complex dynamics at play and the international response to Rwanda's role in this ongoing crisis in the Republic of Congo. Let's listen in and let us, our warriors, take us through this critical discussion.
Rwanda's involvement with the M23 rebels. Well, things have gotten way more complicated. Now South Africa's getting pulled in and things are getting really tense.
Yeah.
We're using this recent episode of Africa I View to try and unpack all of this. It's intense.
Yeah, it's really striking, I think, just how quickly this went from, simmering tensions to accusations and military, buildups and even international sanctions, all, just in a few weeks, basically. It just really shows how fragile things are over there in the DRC.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like a total powder keg.
Yeah.
So for anyone who may not have been following this as closely, the DRC has been dealing with conflict on and off for decades now.
Right.
And all these various armed groups, including the M23, have been fighting for power and control of resources, right? And Rwanda has been accused of supporting M23, but of course they strongly deny it. But then things took a really dramatic turn back in February 2024 when 14 South African soldiers who were part of a UN peacekeeping mission were killed in the DRC.
Yeah, that was really the match that lit the powder keg, you know. South Africa, they directly accused Rwanda of being behind the attack. And the response from Kigali has been, well, incredibly heated.
Yeah, it's been really something. I mean, President Kagame basically said if South Africa wants a war, they'll get one. And then, to make things even worse, to just throw fuel on the fire, the Rwandan government spokesperson Yolande Makolo, she actually accused South Africa of supporting a genocidal government in the DRC.
Right.
So, now we're seeing these accusations flying back and forth, and they carry a lot of historical weight. So it's a lot.
It is. And it's worth thinking about, why Kagame is taking such a defiant stance. He's under so much pressure from the international community, but he seems to be doubling down. Is this like a calculated gamble he's making? Yeah. Or is there some deeper strategy here?
Yeah.
Could he be relying on support from other countries? Or is it possible that he's just misjudging the whole situation?
That's what I find so interesting about this whole thing. This doesn't really seem like just some hot-headed reaction, Kagame has very carefully built this image for himself on the world stage. He's seen as this strong leader who brought Rwanda back after the 1994 genocide.
Right.
And he's gotten a lot of praise for the economic progress and stability in Rwanda. But at the same time, there's always been criticism, about some of his authoritarian tendencies and his human rights record. And now, with this whole conflict, those criticisms are being amplified.
Oh, for sure. And this really puts him in a tough spot. He can't really appear weak, right, or back down from a challenge, especially not when it's South Africa.
No.
They're a regional powerhouse.
Yeah.
And they're making some very serious accusations.
So how did South Africa actually respond to all of this? They didn't just sit back and take it, did they?
No, not at all. They deployed more troops and sent more military equipment to the DRC to reinforce that SADC mission that's already there.
Right.
SADC, for those who don't know, that's the Southern African Development Community. They're a regional group that's been trying to stabilize the DRC for years now.
So essentially we have this situation where a major regional power like South Africa is taking a much more assertive stance.
Yeah.
And that's potentially raising the stakes for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And it's really important to understand that South Africa's involvement here isn't just because of this one incident. They've got these long-standing economic and strategic interests in the DRC.
Right.
They see all the instability there as a direct threat to their own security and prosperity.
So it's not just about, defending their soldiers, but also about protecting their broader interests in the region. Okay, but then to make things even more complicated, right? As if things weren't already complex enough, the European Union enters the picture.
Yeah, and And what they did is actually unprecedented. I mean, the EU Parliament voted to impose sanctions on Rwanda.
Wow.
They're cutting off mineral trade and financial aid, all because of, Rwanda's alleged role in the DRC conflict. Think about that for a second. 443 out of 720 members voted in favor of these sanctions. That's a big, big blow to Rwanda. Their economy relies heavily on those mineral exports and aid from Europe.
Yeah, that's a really strong message from the EU. It seems like they're really trying to force Kagame to change course.
Yeah.
And they have these three very clear demands. They want all Rwandan forces out of the DRC. They want M23 to withdraw from all the areas they've captured, and they want Rwanda to just completely stop interfering in DRC's affairs.
Exactly. And this brings up a really important question. Will these sanctions actually work? I mean, will they be enough to get Kagame to change his strategy, or will they just make him even more defiant?
So we have South Africa, who is increasing their military presence. We have the EU imposing economic pressure, and we have Kagame, who is just staying completely defiant.
Right.
This is this is starting to feel a lot like a recipe for a proxy war, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the big question hanging over all of this. On one side, you've got South Africa and SADC, who are backing the Congolese government.
And then on the other side, you have Rwanda, who's backing the M23 rebels. And of course, there are all those accusations about Rwanda deploying their special forces as well. And then add in the fact that, Western powers are now cutting ties with Rwanda. And yeah,
It's a very explosive mix.
It really is.
It really is. And we have to remember that the DRC conflict, it has the potential to destabilize the entire region. I mean, it's this really complicated web of alliances and rivalries, and there's so much historical baggage, and then you add in the resource competition, and it's
So this could have ripple effects, right? That go way beyond just Rwanda and the DRC.
Oh, absolutely. And for those of you who are really interested in the humanitarian side of things, this is where it gets really heartbreaking. I mean, the DRC has been ravaged by conflict for years, and the human cost is just staggering.
Yeah.
Millions of people have been displaced from their homes, and they're just widespread reports of human rights abuses.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine, really, the scale of the suffering. Are aid organizations able to even reach the people who need help?
It's a huge challenge, to be honest. I mean, with the fighting going on, it's so dangerous for aid workers. And a lot of areas are just completely inaccessible. And then on top of all of that, the political situation makes it so hard to operate effectively.
It's just a really dire situation. And with this whole escalation between South Africa and Rwanda, it just seems like things could get even worse.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a very real possibility. If this turns into a full-blown proxy war, the humanitarian crisis could just completely spiral out of control.
Yeah.
And we could see a massive exodus of refugees, a total breakdown of basic services, and a huge surge in violence.
It's a grim picture for sure. But let's try to look at this from all angles here. What about the African Union? What role are they playing in trying to mediate this conflict?
Well, the AU, they've been pretty actively engaged in diplomacy. They've been urging restraint and dialogue. Well, as we've seen in other conflicts, they often don't have the power, to really enforce any kind of peace agreement.
So they're kind of in a tough spot. They have this mandate to promote peace and security, but they don't necessarily have the resources or the political unity to back it up.
Yeah, it's a really classic dilemma for regional organizations, unfortunately. They often get caught between the interests of these powerful member states and the need for collective action.
So, okay, what do you think? What's the most likely outcome here? Is a peaceful resolution even possible at this point?
It's really hard to say for sure. I mean, so far diplomacy hasn't led to any significant progress, and both sides seem to be digging in their heels.
Yeah, especially with all the strong rhetoric we've been hearing from both Kigali and Pretoria.
Exactly. And that just makes it so much harder to reach any kind of negotiated settlement. I mean, each side would have to make some pretty big concessions, which just doesn't seem very likely right now.
So if diplomacy is failing and the risk of a proxy war is so high, what can be done to prevent this from spiraling out of control?
That's the million-dollar question. It would require a really, really concerted effort from the whole international community.
Yeah.
We need to see sustained diplomatic pressure, not just from the EU, but from other major players like the U.S., China.
So it's not enough for just one actor to step in. It needs to be coordinated.
Right. And that pressure needs to be directed not just at Rwanda and South Africa, but at the Congolese government as well.
Okay.
They need to, address the root causes of this conflict, the corruption, the weak governance, the exploitation of resources, all of it.
So it's not just about like ending the fighting that's happening right now, but actually dealing with the underlying problems that are causing this conflict.
Exactly. And that's going to be a really long-term, complex process.
So even if they manage to get a ceasefire, the really hard work of building peace and stability is just beginning. Yeah, and that's a really important thing for our listeners to understand. This isn't a situation with an easy or a quick fix. It requires this ongoing commitment from everyone involved, and a willingness to really address those deep-seated challenges that the DRC has been dealing with for decades.
It's a reminder that these conflicts are not just, abstract geopolitical events happening somewhere far away. They have real human consequences.
Right.
And they need solutions that go way beyond just military intervention.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've talked about the rising tensions, the possibility of a proxy war, the humanitarian crisis, the challenges of diplomacy. But now I want to bring this a little closer to home for our listeners. You're always so fascinated by the economic implications of global events. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about how this conflict might impact the global economy. Yeah, that's a really good point. This isn't like happening in isolation, right? This conflict, it has the potential to disrupt global supply chains.
Right.
Especially when we're talking about critical minerals.
Okay.
The DRC it's a major source of cobalt, copper, coltan. These are minerals that are essential for everything. Smartphones, electric vehicles, laptops, you name it.
So if the fighting gets worse and it starts to disrupt the mining operations, we could see like a ripple effect through the entire tech industry.
Exactly. And that ripple effect, it means higher prices for consumers.
Right.
Think about it. Your next smartphone, it could be a lot more expensive, and there could be delays, in production as companies try to scramble and find new sources for all these minerals.
So this is, we're not just talking about some abstract event happening in another part of the world.
Right.
This could actually directly affect our wallets and the technology that we use every single day.
Absolutely. And there are these broader economic implications too, all this instability in the region. It's going to scare away foreign investment.
Sure.
Companies, they don't want to invest in places where there's a high risk of conflict or political turmoil.
Which, ultimately that just hurts the economies of both Rwanda and the DRC, making it even harder to, fix those underlying issues that we were talking about earlier.
Right. It's like this vicious cycle. The conflict leads to economic instability, which then just fuels more conflict. Yeah. And it's a trap that, a lot of countries in that region have, they've struggled to break free from it.
So, what can we even do to break this cycle? What should people be looking out for as the situation, as it keeps developing?
I think more than anything, it's so important to, stay informed and really try to understand how complex this conflict is.
Yeah.
Don't just rely on headlines and stuff. Actually do some digging. Mm-hmm. Read analysis from sources you can trust and try to understand the perspectives of the people who are actually affected by this conflict.
So as consumers, we have a responsibility, right, to know where the materials in our products come from and think about, the potential human cost of all of that.
Yeah. And as global citizens, I think we all have a role to play in, speaking up for peaceful solutions and supporting organizations that are working to provide aid and help promote stability in the region.
This has been, a really eye-opening deep dive, for me at least, into a conflict that's incredibly complex and honestly often overlooked. And, it's just clear that what's happening in the DRC has these huge implications, not just for the region, but for the global economy, and the lives of everyday people around the world.
Absolutely. And it just highlights how interconnected our world is.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are happening in one part of the world, they can have these ripple effects across continents. And those ripples, they can affect everything from the supply chains to how much we pay for basic things.
Yeah. It's a really good reminder that we can't afford to be complacent about this.
Right.
We have to stay engaged and informed and active in finding solutions to these global problems.
That's a great way to put it. We all have a stake in building a more peaceful and stable world.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. This is definitely something to keep your eye on because it's far from over. We're going to keep following the developments and we'll be back to provide updates as things evolve. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for joining us on this episode and listening through this episode powered by Notebook Lim and our Wakanda warriors taking us through the deep dive on African Eye View. The tensions between South Africa and Rwanda, as we have just heard, are not just a bilateral issue, but a potential flashpoint for border and regional instability. With the European Union sanctions on Rwanda, South Africa military reinforcement in the DRC, and the defense stance of President Kagame, that stakes are higher than ever. This conflict underscores the delicate balance of power in Africa and the growing influence of global actors shaping its future. As we look ahead, the question remains, will this escalate into a full-scale proxy war? How will Rwanda navigate the economic pressures from the EU? And what role will South Africa play in stabilizing the region? Those are the stories we'll be looking forward to unpack, and stay tuned and follow Africa Eye View. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes where we will deep dive into these SADC mission challenges and also following and at the M23, how will they progress? Will they reach Kinshasa or will they be stopped?